If you have like nice. Not I do. So that's I think it's just I do know. Or they're gonna Bartek, just tell me when you want me to start. You want to just tell me when you want me to start? Okay. Okay. And hopefully my computer doesn't die. So while we're waiting, I'm just going to say a couple things. First of all, welcome. And also, when you sat down, there should have been cards and a pen. If you didn't get that, you can raise your hand and we will deliver some. The purpose of those is to write comments, questions. The presentation's about an hour, so you might forget your question if you don't write it down. So that's the purpose. And you can, at the end of the presentation, we're going to collect the cards and then we'll read through the questions. And that way people who are maybe less, more shy also are encouraged to ask questions. And if you don't want to ask a question, but you just want to leave a comment, you can just write comment at the top and we'll just collect those. And because as I'm going to say in a few minutes, this is an input session. We're presenting our draft report and then we're going to hear input from the community. So it's an opportunity to give that input. So if you need a card or a pen, just let us know. We'll raise your hand and we'll bring you one. Okay, I think we're going to get started. So this is a great turnout. Thank you all for coming. My name is Kate Stryker, and this is our fourth meeting on the Midtown Thriving. I should say fourth public formal meeting here at City Hall. We've had many meetings. So I see a lot of familiar faces. Some of you have been involved in this project from the beginning. Some of you just in certain meetings, and some of you are new faces to me. So thank you all for being here. The agenda for the evening is I'm going to give you just a quick project overview, but the bulk of the presentation is going to be on presenting sections of the draft report, including key findings, just going through the list of strategic sites, going through our recommendations, and then at the end we will do a question and answer. Our project team includes Bartek Starodai. He's the Director of Housing Initiatives with the City of Kingston. Susan Landfried is here with us. She's from the Department of State. She's our grant manager. This is a state-funded planning process. And then we are the consultant. We're with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. We're a regional nonprofit planning and research organization. And we are the consultant for this project. And our team includes the people here. Tonight we have Elke Gottfried right here, who's our executive director of the Center for Housing Solutions and basically the co-author on this report. And myself, I'm Kate Stryker, but the rest of the team was also made contributions. So before we start, this is a map of the study area. So I've been asked numerous times, when you talk about Midtown, what are you talking about? How do we define Midtown? And there's not really an agreed upon exact geography for where Midtown is. But as you can see here, we started up near the traffic circle at 587, go down to Pine Street, up Greenkill Avenue, and include Pine Grove Avenue. The funny shape off Broadway to the south is the high school parcel. We go down to Delaware Avenue, up Hasbrook, up Foxhall, over to O'Neill Street. This geography came out of, in 2019, the county did a pre-nomination study that was sort of step one that led to this study, and they had already decided on a geography in Midtown based on transportation, concentration of vacant and underutilized sites, as well as the area that was covered at that point by the Midtown Arts District. There were some other factors. And then with our steering committee early on, we went through and sort of expanded the boundary to include areas that we felt like were important to include. And you'll understand in a minute why we wanted to expand it. So as I mentioned, this is a grant from New York State. It's known as the Brownfield Opportunity Area Program. This program was really designed for communities that have a concentration of vacant, underutilized, abandoned and sites that may or may not have environmental contamination. And it's to support or to provide assistance to work with the community to develop a vision for the neighborhood. So I'm going to point out it's Brownfield Opportunity Area. So we're not just talking about sites, we're talking about the whole area. So developing a community vision for the neighborhood, creating development concepts for strategic sites within that area. This work should support the remediation and redevelopment of those sites into productive uses to meet community needs. But in addition to all that, it's assistance to develop action, policy, and investment recommendations for the neighborhood. And the last third of this report is going to be, or this presentation is going to be on the neighborhood recommendations. So as I said, first will be key findings, then the strategic sites, and then we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about recommendations that are policy and programmatic recommendations primarily. This all results in, we put this report together, we submit it to the Secretary of State to nominate the area as what's known as a Brownfield Opportunity Area, the BOA. So you're going to see that acronym throughout this presentation. And the benefits of this planning process in sum at the top are BOA planning and brownfield cleanup and redevelopment leads potentially to social, economic, and environmental benefits. But there's other benefits that come out of this process, including the potential for tax credits for the sites where there is contamination. And those tax credits, there's a bump up tax credit that can be used to offset the cost of remediation. So one of the barriers to redeveloping brownfields is the fact that the land's contaminated, and that often has a high cost. So those tax credits are really designed to help get over that barrier. Those tax credits, the bump up, it's a 5% bump up, is only available to developers who have proposals that align with the community vision. So a big part of this planning process is developing that community vision and goals for the neighborhood. Redevelopment, you know, if it's done right in the way that the neighborhood and community want, can lead to new housing, job opportunities, and other community benefits. And then, of course, there's the potential benefit that environmental contamination gets cleaned up, which can have public health benefits. But once the area is designated as a BOA, so what I just mentioned about sending it to the state for designation, then any project in that area becomes eligible for additional public investment, including environmental site assessments. So that's where they go in and they test the soil, they test the water. Again, that can be a big barrier to development because that's a very expensive process to go through. So the state provides support on that to really nudge these projects along. There's also funds for plans and studies and professional services that are available for projects within the BOA. And we're not talking strictly about the strategic sites, but there's other planning activity that can be funded. And then in addition to all of that, if you're familiar at all with competitive state grants and programs, they're competitive. And projects that are within a BOA often get additional points. So they're competitive. There's only so much money. If you're in the BOA, you get knocked up. You don't get knocked up. You get knocked up on the list of priorities. All right. Okay, so here we are. We are in phase 3. And today I'm presenting findings from the draft BOA plan. So over here in phase 3. As I said, we're collecting input. We are collecting input until the end of the month. The report is available online, and there's also a survey online that you can use to submit comments. And again, we're also collecting comments today. Who here has looked at the report? Okay, a fair number of you. So it's very long, as you might have noticed. But today I'm going to go through, I think, what the really important parts are. And if you have questions, you can always go back into the report and look for more detail on anything I present. So how did we get here? Well, about 2 years ago, we started meeting with our steering committee. And this committee was made up of business owners and representatives from different community organizations in Midtown, as well as county staff, some city staff, and just community leaders. Really, we brought these people together to bring in technical assistance, to sort of be the truth on the ground, make sure that we know what's happening in the community, to kind of represent various perspectives in the planning process. And we also started collecting data. So we collected a lot of data. We collected demographic data, economic data. We did market analysis. We looked at land use. We looked at environmental conditions in the neighborhood, transportation systems. The list goes on. And all the while, we were doing community engagement. And our community engagement process was robust in that it was very multifaceted. We did a big survey. We worked with credible messengers who were people from the neighborhood who helped us co-design the survey and then also helped with outreach. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the community engagement process in a second. So we're basically taking all this input, and from that, we drafted a community vision, and that was really drafted with the assistance of the steering committee. That community vision was put on the survey. We asked for input from the community on that. We also wrote the existing conditions analysis for the neighborhood based on all of that input. And in that, we identified key needs and challenges in the community. And we also selected strategic sites, which I'm going to go over in a minute. The next phase was taking those strategic sites out to the community and saying, what does this neighborhood need? What do you want to see here? Identifying goals that supported that vision, and then again, working with the community to develop recommendations. So we did 2 full-day sessions with a mixture of steering committee members, credible messengers, representatives from the county, city, and other community leaders to develop recommendations in response to all those findings. That all got packaged into the draft plan, and that's what I'm presenting today. So I know some of you have heard that several times, so thank you for your patience. Our engagement efforts included the steering committee, public survey, the formal meetings such as this, table events in which we went out to meet the community where they were. And then we did numerous small group discussions. We had conversations at Tilda's Kitchen. We did a walking tour where we went out to the strategic sites. We partnered with the Boys and Girls Club to do an event. We went out to Place Corps. We did something at Broadway Bubble. We met with the library committee, on. And all the while, we also did stakeholder and expert interviews. So it's been extensive. And that brings us to our community vision. So I'm not going to read it out loud because I'm going to give you a second when you don't have to listen to my voice and you can just read it for yourself. But I'll just say, think of this as the sort of umbrella over everything that is to follow. This is sort of the guiding. It is aspirational. If it reads as aspirational, it is. I'll give you a minute. Okay, if I move on. All right, this is available in the report. If you want to give it more attention and leave comments, you're welcome to. But as I mentioned, it's aspirational. It's also somewhat comprehensive. So as you can read in the vision, we talk on a lot of points. You might be wondering, what does this have to do with brownfields? I thought this was a brownfield study. And the response to that is, again, this is an area-wide planning project. And the success of the neighborhood at large really depends on one, yes, new development and setting priorities for that development, but also thinking more comprehensively about the neighborhood. So this really does support that planning part of this project. Before I get into the key findings, just a couple notes. These findings are based on one community input and also on qualitative data. If you're familiar with Pattern for Progress, our organization, we are data nerds, we love data, and that's what we do well. So in addition to other things, of course. So this is a list of sources. I'll point out most of the data points you're about to see come from the US Census American Community Survey. We used their 5-year estimate, and we looked at years 2013 and 2023. So to get a trend over time, obviously COVID happened in that period, a lot of change happened. So seeing the shifts, this is again, the data, there's a lag in when the data is available. So when we were doing this part of the study, 2023 was the most recent data. And the map on the right is showing you, you might be familiar at this point with the outline of the study area, that gray area. It is also showing the 3 census tracts that we used in our analysis. So when I'm going through, you're going to notice, and I'm going to point out that there's some differences primarily between the 2 census tracts north of Broadway and the census tract south of Broadway. So again, the census tracts were used for the census data. For other data sources, the data may only be available at the county or at the city level. All right, so the first theme of the key findings is community changes. There has been an increase in higher earning households and a decline in lower income households in that 2013 to 2023 period. At the same time, in that same decade, median rents increased by an average of $355 to $748 per month, depending on the census tract. North of Broadway, there was an increase in the Hispanic and Latino population. Meanwhile, south of Broadway, we actually saw a decline in racial and ethnic diversity. North of Broadway, there's been an increase in young children, and then conversely, south of Broadway, there's been an increase in people in their 40s and a decline in the number of children. In 2 of the tracts, there's been an increase in the number of senior residents, and that's not surprising. That's a trend that's true throughout the Hudson Valley, throughout the world, I would say, with few exceptions. Especially as the baby boomer population ages. Across the study area and also true across the city at large, educational attainment levels have increased. So the percentage of the population that has an associate's degree or bachelor's degree or above has slowly increased. And all the while, the community, continually when we went out and talked to people, expressed concerns about gentrification and displacement. And we would say that some, if not all of these data points really support that trend or finding. Another finding was, housing. You guys heard of housing in Kingston? So it's a big issue. The top concern on our survey is affordable housing. At the same time, in that same decade, there's been a slight increase in the number of households that are owner occupied and a decrease in the number of tenant households. So there's numerous stories or narratives that could explain why that is, but likely it is the conversion of rentals into ownership because there haven't been a lot of building of new homes in Midtown. And then there's been a slight decrease in the number of households overall. Housing costs and wage data indicate that there's a need for more state and local affordable housing programs that target lower income households. So we did a look, it's in the report, where we look at the the percent of people who are employed in various sectors and the average wages for those jobs in Kingston. And then we broke it down by area median income at 80%, which is what's typically used for many of these programs. Another finding related to affordability is that Midtown has the oldest housing stock in the city. 70% of the units were built before 1940. While old houses are beautiful, I'm a fan of them. They do oftentimes have higher operating and maintenance and energy costs. So when we're thinking about affordability and long-term residents, it's really something to be aware of. All right, so now we're moving on to key findings regarding businesses. Most of these come from, there's not a lot of qualitative data in this. This is mostly from community input. So the community strongly expressed a desire for more small and local business support. So supporting the businesses that exist, and also a desire for businesses that are really catering to the local population. So providing needed goods and services for the neighborhood and at levels that are affordable for people within the community. There was input that there's a lack of affordable commercial and retail options, and that's actually a barrier to young people or people who are just sort of starting out as new entrepreneurs. So related to that, there was suggestions for business incubator spaces with smaller or lower upfront costs, food, such as like a food hall, or just like small stall retail. And then another finding was that there's just a need for better economic opportunities and higher earnings. And that's really thinking again about the affordability within the community. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think 8% of the workforce works in food service. So that's one of the lower income sectors. And so, we really need to think about creating new opportunities for people. 8. Yes. Yes. Thank you for asking for clarification. All right, our next group of key findings are focused on quality of life, and the first subcategory of that is physical assets and needs. We found that 27 acres of the BOA are vacant lots or parking lots, and that's really important because we're looking at those sites. Only 5 acres of land in the BOA are designated as parks, which is about 1% of the area. And in contrast, the city at large, about 9% of the city is parkland. So there's studies that precede this that really look at open space and park space in Midtown. And so this is something that's been said before us, but we also found this to be true. Another finding is that there's really a limited availability of publicly owned land in the BOA. And why is that significant? Because we're talking about making change, and there's only so much the city can do when most of the land is privately owned. So it really, I think what the city can do is, I think the city's been doing this already, is acquiring properties and really thinking about what should be put there. But in addition to that, working with property owners and talking about how can we get community benefits out of redeveloping these areas. The next group is, to continue with physical assets. The rail trail was identified as an underutilized asset. There was talk about activating it at certain nodes, and I'll just point out that the county is actively working on this. Kristen Wilson, I'm going to call you out. She's here. She's leading that effort for the county. So if you're curious, go talk to her. But it's a great amenity right in Midtown, and it is by most accounts underutilized for various reasons. Fresh food access is a concern, especially for residents without access to a vehicle. And then we heard a lot about pedestrian and cyclist safety. And what we did find, and this is in the report, is that there has been a significant decline in crashes. However, it's still an issue. So our recommendations are sort of, this is great, but keep going. The next category is around social assets and needs. We heard from many people that there's a need for more youth and senior activities and programs. The next bullet point, I'm going to start by saying we did a survey with 341 people. So Not hugely representative, but somewhat representative of the community as far as surveys go. And 15% of the survey respondents were African American or self-identified as African American. So we started to look at the reason we asked for demographic data on the survey was so that we could go in and understand who is saying what and what does that tell us. We don't want to pretend that Kingston or Midtown is a monolith, right? There's lots of different little communities, and even within those communities, there's differences, of course. No two people are alike. So one of the findings was that the top concern for people who identified as white was parks. And so then when we saw this finding in sort of juxtaposition to that, one of the top findings for people who identified as African American or Black was feeling welcome. It just was pretty stark finding from our perspective. That really, as I said, sort of speaks to the fact that we're not talking about a homogeneous population. There's different needs depending on people's personal stories, their cultural histories, and understanding those differences is important to really meeting the needs in the community. Throughout our planning process, we found it challenging to engage with the Spanish-speaking community. We did numerous outreach exercises or efforts, and we had some success, but not as much as nowhere near in proportion to the percentage of the people in the community who are within the Hispanic and Latino community. But we also heard from many people working in the area that they also struggle with this. So some of our recommendations are on really working and targeting on this, on outreach and engagement with this population. All right, moving on. So there's a community desire for more venues to gather, especially ones that are free. People talked about how all there is to do in Midtown is go to the bar, and I don't have money to go to a bar, so I need somewhere where I can go hang out. Bars are great, but just not for everybody all the time. There's a need for more community-based organizational collaboration. So in our planning process, we talked to many different community organizations. And one of the things that we heard was we're not very collaborative, that there's somewhat of a competitiveness between some of the organizations. And so there's redundancy of work and effort, and there really could be just a better structure to bring those organizations together to further the work that they're all working to do. Mental health issues and services were a priority for the community. And then people also talk about the number of unhoused individuals in the neighborhood. All right, environmental assets and needs. So in our work, we found 15 properties that are with known or suspected contamination in the neighborhood. And then we found, if you see the report, over 100 properties that have historical use, which is sometimes associated with contamination. So to do that, we looked at old Sanborn fire insurance maps going back to the 1880s and looked at the uses over the decades and flagged the properties that could be an issue. But again, there needs to be more investigation on those properties. But either way, there is known and established contamination in the neighborhood. We did a presentation back in May of 2024, where we did a deep dive on the known contamination. That presentation is available on our website if you want to watch it. There's concerns about the environment. So the community wants to see that cleaned up naturally. There's concerns about the impact of development itself. So people talked about, oh, it's going to be noisy, it's going to be dusty, they're going to be tearing things out and doing it in a haphazard way. So there's sort of request that that process goes in a way that's doesn't create environmental issues. Related to that, we heard from people about wanting more sustainably built, more sustainable buildings, you know, thinking about energy efficiency, less auto dependence. We also found that Midtown has the highest recorded surface temperatures in the county. There's some maps in our report that show this. So we have some recommendations related to that. And then the community expressed just, you know, as I said, a desire for more gardens, trees, and greening of Midtown. So that was a lot. You guys are doing great. Thanks for hanging in there. I'm going to keep going. when we went out and talked to the community, we kept a list of basically every idea that came up for what could be done at these sites. And we're calling these community defined development priorities. These are what the community said they want to see. Top of the list, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised, is affordable housing. But people also, again, talked about seniors and youth programs, a real want for more food store options, more open space. I'm not going to read through the whole list. You can, again, refer to it in the plan if you want, but some great ideas, including public bathrooms, which is important to think about. Okay, so these are our 11 strategic sites. And these all provide important opportunities for meeting community needs. We started, the way we honed in on these 11 sites is we started with every single parcel in the neighborhood, and then we did a process of elimination based on existing use. Was it marked as vacant or underutilized? The size of the parcel, we didn't want to go in and look at single family homes, so that was easy to eliminate a lot. But most of them are parking lots or just kind of empty lots. Some of them have some structures, but they're really underutilized as we found, but also from what we heard from people. So I'm going to go quickly through the sites. As I said, there's 11 of them. For all of them, you're probably all aware that the city updated the zoning a few years ago. And under the new zoning, most of them are under the T5 Main Street or the T5 Flex, which allows for mixed use development. So we're talking about mixture of residential and commercial use primarily. So they basically are all in a similar situation. The differences between them are the size, the ownership. There's a mixture of publicly owned and privately owned. And then, of course, some of them do have environmental issues. They are all within a half-mile Broadway, which was one of our criteria because we wanted to locate them near the bus routes, thinking about walkability and reducing dependence on automobiles. I'm not going to read every point in here. I'm going to point out a couple things. The bottom 3 bullet points on each slide show the development potential. And so this is the maximum allowable development, either for commercial space or residential space. Because most of them are up to 6 stories, most of the top floors are set aside for residential. So we're talking about a lot of housing, potentially, if you look at the square footage for each of these sites. So again, I'm going to go through this quickly because we still have a lot to do. The first one's 316 Broadway, privately owned. This is where the Walgreens is. There was contamination here at one point. It was remediated. If it were to be redeveloped with the intended use as residential, there's a likely chance that it would need new environmental assessment and possible more remediation to accommodate that need. The next site is 349, 355 Broadway. This is a small parking lot that's owned by the city. It's actually pretty much across the street. But again, if you look at the development potential there, it's pretty significant. The next site is also a city-owned parking lot on Broadway. Similar story. And no known contamination, no known or suspected contamination at either of those sites. The next site is 615 Broadway. You're probably familiar with this because the city selected Baxter Building Corporation through an RFP or RFP process to partner with. And there's, I think the proposal for this is pretty far along. They're planning 70 residential units with ground floor commercial space and dedicated community open space. And this site is in the brownfield cleanup program, so they likely will be applying for that tax credit that I mentioned. The next site is 25 Field Court. There was news articles about this site this week. The city put out an RFEI for this site. It's heavily contaminated. It's been vacant for decades. It's right on the linear park. And the proposal that was selected will include high density, affordable residential with some deep affordability. It will include community space and potential retail space. And yeah, I'll just mention that in the RFEI, they actually copied that vision statement that we read a few minutes ago. So the applicants were really supposed to respond to thinking about how to meet the goals that are spoken to in that vision. Next is 40 to 44 grand. This is a combined 2 lots and 36 to 38. This is privately owned. Significant development potential. There's no known environmental issues here. However, it was historically, I'm forgetting what its use was, but there was some use it had a long time ago that warrants at least a phase one, which is where you go and just do sort of an investigation of the past use and think about the potential for contamination. The next site is 85 grand. This is our largest strategic site. It's 3.96 acres. It's currently used as there's some storage space and some moving vans that are parked there. It has gone through remediation. It would need a more environmental assessment to be redeveloped, but it has humongous, as you can see by the numbers, development potential there. And it's, yeah. Next is 8789 Greenkill Avenue and 2 to 8 Sterling Street. This is privately owned. Similar story to the other sites. It's a parking lot right now. The owner of this lot owns the building across the street. He's interested, when we spoke with him, he was interested in redeveloping this site for, most likely for housing. The next site is owned by the hospital. This is 4145 Railroad Avenue. You might be familiar with the site if you cut through from the DEP parking lot, as we saw many people do. It's set aside by the hospital for overflow, but it's pretty underutilized. It's adjacent to the Empire State Trail and the Midtown Linear Park, and there's no known contamination there. But when we met with the DEC, they recommended a phase one, just based, I think, on the fact that it was a hotel at one point, and it had some functionality related to the train stop right there. The next stop is 80 Smith Avenue. This is just adjacent to that the largest site that I just showed you, the one with known contamination. It's owned by an arts organization. It's currently used for exhibitions. The owners are interested in considering redeveloping it in line with the community goals and vision. There's a structure that's a former bank. Next is this is 3041 Thomas Street. This is a municipal parking lot, which is heavily used. We were there on a Saturday and it was pretty much completely full. So I know that one of the things we're going to hear about is why you're taking all the parking away. Maybe not from all of you, but certainly a perspective. And with this site, which is I think it's the only parking lot in our list that is actually used at full capacity, at least part of the time. So, redevelopment of this doesn't mean eliminating that use. It means potentially putting parking on the ground floor and building above it. That is an option. It's done elsewhere. And I'll just say about that site, it is centrally located and it's publicly owned, and it's a big publicly owned site. So that's why we chose to include it on our list. Okay, taking in a breath. The next step is the next group of things I'm talking about are recommendations. So before I get into this, I want to rehash something I already said, which is that, yes, this is a brownfield study. A lot of these recommendations are going to seem like, what do they have to do with brownfields? Again, this is really in support of the development we're talking about, the vision that the community came up with. And again, these recommendations were initially drafted with community. So through several sessions, we came up with them. Then we put them out to the public. We did a public event. We made them public. We asked for comments. You may have commented on them. And we modified them. We worked through them over and over. But they're still draft. So if you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, again, please feel free to ask. And I'm just going to make one announcement because some people have come in. There are little note cards to write questions on. We are going to do a Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, we're asking you to write them on the cards so that we can read them. Okay, so these recommendations are intended to guide future planning, policy, growth, and investment for the neighborhood. And again, these recommendations complement the strategic sites. And they also establish clear priorities for redevelopment and other actions for community improvement. And there's sort of 5 categories of them. They're about community, housing, the economy, quality of life. And then the 5th category, and this is some of the recommendations are at the city level or the county level because there's policy at different levels of government that have, impact on the neighborhood. And so we can't just think within the neighborhood if we really want to affect the change that may be needed. All right, and there's 12 of these. So just so you know what you're in for. Goal 1, increase representation, dialogue, trust, collaboration, and civic engagement in Midtown and citywide. Ensure planning projects and policies reflect the needs, values, and priorities of the people they will impact, and that these efforts including this BOA plan are implemented. So the first step from our perspective is once we submit the plan for designation, and that designation is granted, as the consultant, we're sort of done. Sadly, we love Kingston, but we'll keep coming back to work here, but our contract will be done. And so it's really up to the city and the community to think about how to implement this plan. So there's one thing I'll say is there's recommendations here. And then again, if you look at the plan, there are strategies that support all these recommendations. So this is really the Cliff Notes version of what you would see if you were reading it. Related to that, through the process of implementing it, we think it's an opportunity for the city to pilot a new civic engagement strategy, one in which there's partnership with the community organizations that were part of the process from the beginning. So don't break that relationship just because the report's been published, continue those relationships going forward. The next goal is strengthen the community's agency to determine its own future and influence development outcomes. So in this list, make efforts to support cooperative and community ownership. There's many tools for doing this. You may be aware that there's a community land trust in the city of Kingston that's sort of just getting started called Taproot. So supporting organizations like that, there's a whole list of ways to do this that we spell out in the report. Consider public purchase options of housing that comes on the market. So there's legislation that's been passed in other communities called COPA, which stands for Community Option to Purchase Act. And so the recommendation is really to consider, does that make sense here? Are there enough buildings that go on the market that would have a significant impact? Is that something that the city would want to do? And there's also sort of developing case law around that. So sort of keeping the eye on that as it moves forward. Consider implementing a local hire initiative program. So one easy idea for how to do this would be through any RF request for bid process. Ask the applicants to commit to hiring a certain % of people locally. So within the region, when we say locally, we mean within a certain region, a certain area around Kingston, just to increase the work opportunities for people. So, a lot of, I'm not sure in Kingston whether this is true, but oftentimes contractors bring in their workforce from the outside. So this is really to make sure that any kind of investment in the neighborhood is benefiting the people who are close to the neighborhood or within the neighborhood. All right. With the purpose of revitalizing in an inclusive manner that is reflective of the diverse communities in Midtown and their histories, foster a deep sense of belonging, uplift community identity, and nurture cross-cultural understanding of Midtown, prioritize representation of communities who have experienced systemic marginalization. So we heard in our community engagement process, we heard a lot about how some communities just don't feel like they're part of the process, that they're welcome in the process. And of course, there's some historical events that have sort of created that environment. So there are groups actively working on this, and we call them out in the plan, but really just to continue their efforts to bring public awareness to the legacies and histories of Midtown's diverse communities. And we have a whole list of ideas related to that. We also recommend assessing the potential benefits of historic designation for the neighborhood. So Kingston already has 2 historic districts, 4. And there's pros and cons to historic designation. There is an argument to be made that Midtown should be a historic district based on its past use as sort of industrial center for Ulster County, the fact that it's always been a place where immigrants move and live and settle generation after generation. And that there's an established African American community that had one of the first commercial districts. I'm not sure I'm getting that history right, in the country, I think, privately owned African American commercial districts. So the benefits of historic designation include tax credits, eligibility for grants, and also just sort of the local community identity and storytelling, sense of pride, sense of place, and really honoring the people who live in that community and who've been there for a long time. But there's some costs, so it's really assess this option. The Kingston Arts and Culture Department and the Midtown Arts District have been central in advancing these strategies. This recommendation is really just to encourage them to continue doing that, knowing that arts can play a central role in uplifting culture and history. Consider increasing funding opportunities that support the creation and retention of minority-owned businesses and third spaces. Okay, goal 4, we still have a ways to go. Create housing that is stable and affordable for local residents. So continue to leverage public land to meet these needs. Continue to evaluate and support tenant protections when it's possible to do so. Explore strategies to further development projects with 100% affordability. So ways that can be done is working with developers, letting them know about programs that provide subsidies to do that kind of development, offering pilots, and there's other strategies we list. Assess deepening the mandatory affordability for areas in the city that have higher land values. Assess regulatory barriers that prolong development timelines to prevent desired development, and support efforts to establish shared community ownership and resources and infrastructure for cost savings. So for example, if you're unclear on that last one, there are communities that have community-owned solar, community-owned cellular and internet service. If you bring those costs down for people who are experiencing housing cost burden, it helps them out. So it's an indirect way to get at those costs. Ensure residents have access to safe and healthy housing. Create targeted policies that advance housing options for at-risk communities, such as seniors. We can all think of the groups that might be most at risk, but there's creative solutions that could be done to create really deep affordability, such as co-housing projects where you have, smaller spaces and more shared facilities. Ensure middle-income households do not fall through the cracks of existing programs by expanding eligibility criteria when possible. So under funding guidelines. So we're really talking about at city, county, and even state level. Increase opportunities and support for new and local businesses. Actively support the creation of affordable and shared commercial spaces. I sort of mentioned that earlier. Better connect entrepreneurs and small businesses to existing resources. So we call them out in the report, but there's many organizations already working on this, but they're maybe not reaching the people most in need, especially in Midtown. So the recommendation is that there's better collaboration and outreach within the neighborhood. Support the creation and success of employee-owned businesses. So employee-owned businesses mean people who maybe work in retail or for restaurants actually have an opportunity to own something and gain some equity and ownership. And there's an organization in the Hudson Valley called Hudson Valley Co-op, if you're not familiar with them, and they work with businesses that are either trying to form or for succession planning. So right now there's a large number of businesses where the owners are entering retirement years. This is a trend across the country, and a lot of those businesses are going to close. I'm in Beacon, and this week we lost BJ's, which is one of the oldest restaurants in the city. and because the owner is getting old and wants to retire. So it's possible to work with those businesses and convert them to employee owned. And there's an organization here that does that. Um, Expand food retail options and access to healthy, fresh, and affordable produce. All right, goal 8, increase the skill base of Midtown residents and expand access to skilled licensed workers who can offer affordable support for local projects. So the idea behind this is that one of the affordability challenges is home repairs and also building, right? So if these recommendations are really targeted at that, creating a local collaborative and contracting guild that offers discounted rates for local residents, expand training programs in carpentry, plumbing, and other trades. These programs exist, but again, we heard from many people, I'd love to do that. I have no idea how to do that. There's no education opportunities. So really just thinking more about outreach and connecting people to those opportunities. And then the Kingston Library has a tool library, which, it's just sort of a creative recommendation. Just there's these resources that are really underutilized. Goal 9, increase food access through education, community agency, and social connectivity. Increase access to community gardens. So there's a number of community gardens. We heard that they're not always well utilized. So I think one of the things to work on is outreach around that. But the other is that with all this new development that we're already seeing, I should say, but we hope to see more. If you live in an apartment building, you don't really have access to a yard. So I actually think the need for these kinds of spaces is going to increase with all that new development. So thinking about where we're going to set aside land to do that. Support Grow Well Kingston, which is doing great work by convening existing partners and collaborating more, and then sharing the results of the recently published food systems plan with organizations that might not even be aware that it exists. One of the findings, I don't know if I have it explicitly stated here, but was that communication, and this is true everywhere, it's hard because some people still read the paper, a lot of people are online. It's not always clear how we should communicate about programs and policies. Goal 10, expand youth, senior, and intergenerational programming. So create more engaging opportunities for youth, more spaces, invest in youth leadership, and work to embed young people in democratic governance. If you read the report, we have some recommendations in here around a youth advisory council for the city. There's models of that in other cities. And the point of that is really just to bring the youth perspective into this process because it's very often absent. Goal 11, improve pedestrian, cyclists, and motorist safety along the Broadway corridor and throughout the BOA. As I mentioned, there has been a significant decrease since the major work that was done on Broadway, but there's still concerns. So we have some recommendations around signage, turning. One of the recommendations that came up or ideas that we heard from the community from more than one person was to eliminate one of the parking lanes on Broadway. So really thinking about if that were to happen, how would you accommodate that parking? And then I'll jump down to the last one. For any serious modification of Broadway, obviously the businesses need to be consulted in that process because they're going to be the most directly and immediately impacted. And then I'll just go back up, create an alternative bike routes such as bicycle boulevards on some of the side streets. All right, we made it to goal 12. Hopefully you're all still listening. Increase access to parks and open space. Surprise. We know that this is a want, so we're formally including it in the report. The 12.2, create a heat management plan. With climate change, the number of days where we have extreme heat is on the increase. There are certain communities that are very vulnerable on these days. And the idea is that in a heat management plan, you really consider the sort of emergency response on those days. But you're also thinking forward, how do we mitigate heat? I said 20 minutes ago that Midtown's the hottest recorded temperatures in the county. So what can be done? I mean, I don't, so we're talking about increasing tree coverage and reducing impermeable surfaces, and then requiring native plantings in all publicly supported or managed projects. Okay, we got through it. So this report is available online until January 31st. You can use the QR code there to access it. And again, you can make comments on our survey. And now we will take comments from you. So if you have a question or a comment, please write it down. If you need paper, raise your hand and we'll bring you paper. And otherwise, we're going to walk around. We're just going to spend a minute collecting cards from you. I should say that, but we'll be here for a while. Any other questions or comments before we get going? Are there any online? All right, so I'm going to invite Bartek and Elka up to help answer questions with me, because they were also part of this. It's not just me. Some are more common. There's maybe some people online. Oh yeah. Can I take them all?
Okay. First question. All proposed buildings are 6 stories high. Can we considering lowering it to 4 stories? Sorry again. Oh, sorry. My bad. Can you hear me? Okay. So the first one is about building height, asking to lower building height from 6 stories to 4 stories. The response to that is that a couple of years ago, the city of Kingston did undergo a pretty significant rezoning effort. And so, and that height limit was determined by the zoning code. So we can't really address that in this plan. So that would be a conversation with Bartek separately at another time.
Just add something to that. So one thing I think is worth pointing out is this isn't all going to happen tomorrow. A lot of these projects take years, and this is really a plan to set the city up or the neighborhood up for the next 20 years. And so if Midtown, if the city continues to grow, density and height increase is going to happen. I mean, the alternative to growing up is growing out. So there's always a trade-off. And so 6 stories might seem high now, but the way the world's going might not be. Yeah.
How many stories high is the current highest building in Midtown? I mean, it's about 2.
Yeah.
There is a 6. Okay, but that's just one, right?
Okay, so let us,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Or 5, 6.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that with zoning, it's the maximum allowable. So you're not going to have every single lot be built up to 6 stories. It's just not.
Yeah,
it's
and
not-
actually, typically, you're really going to max out at 4 because once you go above 4 stories, the construction costs go up exponentially, actually. So you're going to see 4 as being the most typical.
Um, I should have been collecting these while you were, you know what? I am realizing that maybe this is not the best method. Only because of handwriting. Okay. One of the questions that came up was who is the housing for? So we're talking a lot about affordable housing, new housing, significant development of housing, and the answer is whoever wants to live in Midtown should have the choice to live in Midtown. A lot of people have been priced out over the years. We want those people to have the opportunity to move home. We also have in Ulster County hundreds of families with children living in hotels right now because of recent increases in homelessness. These are working people who just can't afford rent anymore. So all of these, the need for housing is dramatically clear. So just sorry.
You're talking about brownfield development to bring housing into empty lots,
Mhm.
right? And that housing would be would increase the amount of units that are available,
Certainly,
correct?
yeah.
So would that be for people, and this is the question I was asking you earlier, would that be for people who are already housed? Would it be only for the unhoused? Or would it be to bring new people, more people into the Midtown area? Because
Mhm.
those who have houses already have houses. They don't need what would be built in the brownfield.
I mean, all of the above. There's absolutely. I mean, there's no reason
But it's not making sense to me. It's like
this might be
your goals seem fuzzy.
okay. This might be a question for Bartek, considering he led the rezoning efforts.
Well, I mean, it depends on, sometimes there's state sources of subsidy for housing, right, that prioritize certain groups, right? So those that are at risk of homelessness or, right, that need housing now. So in those cases, right, there are designated groups for which the housing is for, or sometimes there's income maximums. So you can only make so much, right, to be able to live in a unit.
Program. You're not responding to programs that are out there. You're talking about building new housing in empty fields in Midtown Kingston. So who are these houses for? Who are they for? People that already have houses that are in Midtown? Are they for the unhoused, or is it for new residents moving into Midtown? That's my question.
The question for, I mean, the answer for me is all the above.
I guess I think because we all work in housing, we are well aware that there is a housing crisis. There is a big need for housing. As Elka said, there's hundreds of people who are living in hotels in Ulster County. Our organization wrote a report about that last year. So there's a need for housing. There's always going to be a need for housing. As long as we have population increase, there's going to be a need for housing. But the other phenomenon that's happening is household sizes are getting smaller. So many more people are choosing to live alone. That means a home which used to maybe have 5 people is now occupied by 1 person. That is a trend that is occurring across the Hudson Valley. So it seems that there continues to be a need for housing. So we're building for people who live here, who are unable to find housing. We're building for people who are going to come here. We're building for people who live here and don't like their housing and want to live in something different. And that opens up other housing options. So the idea by building more housing is to take the pressure off the supply of housing that's currently there. And so again, who is it for? Yeah, it's certainly to serve the community, but it's also just a planning. Building housing is part of having a community. If you don't have housing, you're going to have problems.
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, next, thank you. Next question is, in identifying these strategic sites, does the city plan on purchasing any of the sites, or are we focused on limiting the type of private development through the BOA Midtown Thriving criteria? So the purpose of the Midtown BOA is not to limit private development, but to incentivize private development to meet community needs. So if someone owns a site that has a potential contaminant on the site, if a developer chooses to meet community needs through new development, they will qualify for a certain amount of funding in order to offset the cost of remediation. Susan, did I get that right? Right. Yes. And even if there is no contamination, there are other funding opportunities that they may be able to access if they do meet the community needs. So just to be clear, it's not about limiting private development, it's about influencing private development. And with regards to city planning on purchasing any additional sites, I don't recall hearing any of that, but
It's certainly always an option, but it's the issue is that it's very expensive. So there has to be a public willingness, right, to budget for an acquisition cost that could be in the millions. And often that's not really feasible, unfortunately.
Just one follow-up to the gentleman over there's question. But okay, so if I'm a developer and I apply for this grant and I'm going to build, I don't know, a 20-unit building, there are requirements that part of that be affordable and workplace, right? So that just is an addition to his because they have to have those units there, right?
all right. If the rail trail is a great asset, why is it underutilized?
Can we, I mean,
I was actually just about to say, Kristen, do you want to say a few things about the rail trail or? All right. Special guest, Kristen Wilson, go on down.
this is a
So do you want me to answer that question specifically or
Well, yeah,
just talk about the?
I think the first thing is, I mean, underutilized. Like, what does that mean? Or is that the county's assessment? Is that it's underutilized? That's what we heard from people. And then the question.
Yeah, I think so right now we're doing a design process for the Midtown Linear Park. It's called the Midtown Linear Park Community Space Design. We called it that because previously there was the idea that it would be a playground or a park of some sort, but we really wanted to kind of like open the opportunities for the space to include other things like market space or space for events, things like that. So we've been doing kind of concurrently to this project a community design, a very robust outreach process. We've held at least 5 outreach events plus many more pop-ups and with our landscape designers. And we have a conceptual design. It's up on our website now on Participate Ulster, so you can check that out. And I guess I'm not sure what my answer is to the idea that the space is underutilized. We don't have any official counts of what's happening in the space. I think more what I perceive the issue on the Midtown Linear Park is that the space, and many of you in this room may think the same thing, the space is being utilized in ways that are not necessarily friendly to all users of the park. So, I mean, as many people know, we have people who are using the park, and it's making it so that it's scary for families or children to be on the park. So that's kind of the main issue that I think we're facing with the new design. And we're hoping that the design that we come forth with will help address some of those issues and deter some of the more illicit uses of the park, but also are supportive to everybody in the community. So that's the, I don't know if it's underutilized. It's more just like what is the use that's happening. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the entire Kingston Green Line, the Green Line is a combination of complete streets, linear trails, rail trails. So yeah, it's a rail trail. It was a rail, rail yard, in fact, and now it's been turned into a trail. But it was named the Midtown Linear Park. But the system extends much beyond what the county owns is from Cornell Street to Hannaford. And then there's other trails that connect to it. But the focus of our design project is between Cornell and Down Street. Yeah. So do you think it's underutilized? Yeah. Not as many as there could be. Yeah, maybe with other amenities and activities. Yeah. I'm sorry, I work for the county. I'm in the county planning office.
All right, we have a stack of questions to get through.
Yeah.
And we will be here until all questions are answered, so, you know, that's fine with us. The next question here is about parking. Asking about the density of parked cars and parking lots. The city is about to embark on a parking study. And so I do not have the specific answer to that question, but soon enough, you will all have the answer to that question.
Yeah, the study will, okay. The study is going to look at all of the existing parking lots and see the extent to which they're actually utilized or their utilization rate. So that will give us a better idea of if we're redeveloping parking lots, which ones should we focus on or which ones should we not focus on because they're being really fully used.
But the parking lots that we included in the strategic sites, when we went out to visit those sites repeatedly, Bartek lives in the city, is familiar with all of the sites. It is our understanding that these sites are underutilized just based on going out and seeing them. So sometimes there's like less than a few cars there. But yeah, the parking study will add more concrete information to that. We're going to keep going with the written questions unless, is that okay?
We're going to keep going. Okay, so there's a question here about the COPA, the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, and whether the Kingston City Land Bank is associated with that that concept. So just for clarification, the COPA, I know you all want to sing the song, but the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act is essentially a law that any municipality can adopt that says if a residential, or actually it doesn't have to be residential, if any property goes up for sale, the community can purchase, has the kind of the first right of refusal to purchase that. And so there's no specific organization that's associated with that. It's kind of a separate idea where it's again, it's a law that a city can pass to allow for community organizations to purchase buildings that go on for sale. Does that make sense? Oh, okay. Would the land bank qualify as an organization that could purchase if a COPA were to be adopted? Yes, as a nonprofit, it could. Thank you for clear. I did not understand. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any other questions in there? Yeah. Okay. I have a card here that has a lot of comments that I would like to speak to this person about, but one of the questions here is who are the credible messengers and how can I connect with them? There's actually one of them in the room today. Shatea, do you want to introduce yourself? Say hi. So Shatea was one of the credible messengers. The credible messengers are also listed in the plan. And if you're interested in getting in touch with them, we can certainly make that connection. Bartek can make that connection. So just reach out to us and we're happy to connect. Okay, there's a question here about cost concerns regarding environmental surveys. What's the cost of cleanup? What's the cost of doing the survey? And the answer there is one that I think Susan can answer best. Would you like to take a shot?
So I can't speak to the cost of what a phase 2 ESA is, Kristen. I don't know if you have experience, but maybe you can. But I would guess probably around $100,000, maybe a little bit less. In terms of like what the cost of cleanup is, it really depends on the contamination, extent of contamination, et cetera, the type of contamination, and also what the proposed use is going to be. So for residential uses, the cleanup has to be pretty extensive in order for it to be safely lived on. So the cost of that is going to be more extensive than say if you were to put a parking lot on it and essentially cap that. So it all really depends on what that proposed use is going to be in terms of the amount of cleanup. And that's one of the real things about the 5% bump up is to really help cover those costs of remediation if a property is accepted through the brownfield cleanup program and incentivize those because that's such a significant portion of the redevelopment.
Does that answer the question of whoever asked that question? No? Okay. Okay, onward. There's a comment here about a question here about the upcoming trade school. Was goal 8 written considering the upcoming trade school in mind? I am not familiar with the upcoming trade school. I don't. Is there a trade school that's? Oh, the Metro. Okay. Yes, we are aware of the Metro, and that we did incorporate that into our kind of analysis of assets that are in the community. The next question is kind of related to one we already heard, which is how much control does the city have to prevent private development that's incongruous to this plan? The answer is none. The city has no control over what private developers do, aside from, the height of development, anything that's in the zoning is going to determine what a development looks like.
The city can control zoning, right, and the approvals, but in terms of, if the use has to be in the zoning table, right, as allowed for that district, but we can't control private development, nor would we want to, right? It would be a lot, but. Yeah.
Real quick, based off of that, y'all can say no though, right? To the
Say no to someone.
like proposal if it's not a part of the or.
So I mean, one thing in the BOA, the one main lever we have over controlling development is really through the tax credits. And it's not controlling development, but as Elka says, it's incentivizing development that is supporting community goals and needs.
Next question is about the historic district. There is a question here about whether if Midtown was designated a historic district, would it restrict development? The answer is it depends. So historic district guidelines can be restrictive and they can also be less restrictive. The state Historic Preservation Office does not require very strict historic guidelines. Oftentimes the most restrictive historic preservation guidelines are at the city level. So when designing, and we get into this a little bit more in depth in the strategies in the plan, but when designing these historic district guidelines, if this is something that the city does pursue, those considerations need to be incorporated, right? And so we most certainly do not want to restrict development. So just to be very, very clear, and that's also why we recommend to consider those policies and really assess the pros and cons and whether it makes sense here. There's a, what? Do you want to do this one?
Well, I don't know who read it. Do you want to do that easy one?
Which one? About this one? Yeah. Okay, there's a request here to define affordable housing. How much time do I have? Okay, technically, the industry standard for affordable housing essentially means housing that has a monthly cost of no more than 30% of a household's income. So according to the federal guidelines for affordable housing, no household should be paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So that is the broad definition of affordable. There's obviously more to say, but we're not, probably another time. you want to go?
Yeah, I'll do two. So this question says, was any consideration made for energy systems such as shared heating and cooling, microgrids, ground source heat pumps? I mean, it was a little outside the scope of this project. We did have a recommendation on energy efficiencies, and I would love to see all that, but it's a little outside the scope. And then 12.4 recommendation, native plantings are already strongly recommended in the form-based code, and what we actually write in the plan is that they should be required.
Okay, next. The number of people per household and whether that differs in Midtown from other areas of Kingston. I do believe that north of Broadway, the household sizes were larger than south of Broadway. And so there is some differentiation, and you can see that in the plan. I unfortunately do not remember the numbers on top of my head, but if you are interested, if you're interested in those numbers, please do check out the plan. The next question is, why was 316 Broadway, the Walgreens, selected? This business provides important goods and services. The answer to this question is multifold, I think, and I imagine Bartek and Kate will have what to add. So a few things. First of all, it's a Walgreens now. It might not be a Walgreens in 10 years, right? Large stores do close shop. They do leave. We've seen this in many communities. And what happens when they leave?
The Rite Aid just closed.
The Rite Aid just closed. There we go. So, you know, as planners, we have to think ahead. We're not thinking about only about what's there now. We're thinking about, you know, what happens if this does change and how do we encourage the type of development that we'd like to see. So that's number one. Number two is a large part of that lot is currently parking. And Kate is actually just about to publish through Pattern for Progress through our organization, a study on redeveloping underutilized parking lots in general. So it is possible to make better use of that site, even with the Walgreens there. So those are two reasons why I would say that that site is a good site to look at. It also has really significant development potential, and it does have a historic use of contamination that may qualify it for additional funding from the state. So do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, also just keep in mind that any future development could include the Walgreens on the ground floor, so the Walgreens can continue to be there.
Yeah. You're next, or go for it. But do you want to try that one? Okay.
So I'm going to guess what this question's about. It says, how is the life length of the Midtown parking lots infrastructure project? I think it's about the green infrastructure on the Thomas Street parking lot.
Yeah, so I looked at this and I'm 75% sure this is correct, but there's no specific length of time that parking lot needs to remain a parking lot. I would have to double confirm to give you an exact answer, but I'm pretty sure that's true.
Okay, we have one more question. To consider having at least a Spanish translation in other languages. Noted. You have more questions? I think at this point, do we want to just?
We could just open.
I think we could just open up. We just appreciate having these written so that we can also go back and make sure that we're relating to them after the fact.
It was just along with the parking, because you've talked a couple about the parking. Two of the places that you're going to be building on are currently used for parking. And I was wondering if, speaking of the one across the street, UPAC uses it whenever they have a show. And the field court, the businesses, I know they're not supposed to be using it, but I think they do. And with Westkill, myself, Rewind, we have, and Kingston Bread and Bar, there's been a lot of new businesses in that area. So I'm just wondering what the plan is for the parking lot in that area specifically, if there is one.
I think Bartek, do you want to answer it?
You're speaking about the plan for the Cornell Street lot, or?
Two places that are going to be used for housing, from what I understand. And currently, they are both used.
Yeah, so 615 Broadway, right, is currently not utilized for anything except that UPAC uses it when it has a show. Yeah, so I mean, it's city property, right? UPAC is aware that at some point it's no longer going to be available for UPAC parking. That's UPAC, right? They've been planning for this for years, so they know it's coming. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is the parking study that we're currently doing, which will outline, right, what other improvements we should be making to our parking infrastructure. And then I think your other question was around 25 Phil Court. Yeah, that is going to be a challenge. I will say that the developers that we have chosen for that site are looking to include some parking on the site. So that is they're thinking about that and the needs of the surrounding businesses.
Crazy right now, as like even just with the new businesses, which is great. It's all good. And there is a lot of walking traffic, but there's a lot of cars too.
Of course.
So oh, yes.
Just two things. One, when is the plan going to be submitted to the state?
So the plan for the plan is that we are going to take all of this input, all the input that's offered on our survey online. At the end of the month, we're closing the input, and then hopefully it doesn't take too long to respond to all of it. But our intention is by the end of February to be submitting, and then I think it takes a few months for the state to sort of process. So designation is, late spring, early summer, probably.
I also just wanted to say thank you. For all of you who haven't been here, this group of people has been putting in a lot of work and effort so that we can find out about what's happening in Midtown. And I just want to say thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Did you want to share your? Yeah, no.
I don't know. Thank you. Oh, gotcha. I'm Bill Cranston, current president of the Midtown Business Alliance. The Midtown Business Alliance appreciates the opportunity to comment on the Midtown Thriving Draft. We would like to note that on the record that in the early stages of the process, the messaging regarding the initiative's specific scope and objectives was not entirely clear to the local business community. Clear communication at the onset would have fostered early buy-in. However, we are pleased to engage deeply with the current comprehensive draft. The draft represents a highly impressive, in-depth technical analysis of Midtown Kingston. While the MBA values this rigorous, data-driven approach, we feel the plan at times overlooks the, quote, everyday reality and the organic nature of the neighborhood. Midtown's success is built on more than just census data. It was built on the informal networks, cultural heritage, and unique social rhythms that statistical analysis can struggle to capture. We advocate for a final plan that balances its quantitative findings with the qualitative lived experiences for those who work and live here daily. We do have a proposed amendment in Section 7, Section 7.5, we're hoping. To ensure this plan is successfully implemented, the MBA proposed the addition of Section 7.5, Economic Empowerment and the MBA Integration. This section would explicitly align the plan's goals with the MBA's mission statement, which is to build prosperity in Midtown Kingston by advocating for, supporting, and promoting existing businesses, empowering residents to build successful businesses, and amplifying the voices of the community members. We've got some objective goals there. I'll spare you the lengthy talking, but thank you for the engagement.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. And it's prepared. I'm not too good with like off the cuff remarks, so I usually write things down. Um, Kate and her team has done a tremendous job in the quantitative analysis. The MBK just doesn't want the everyday to be overlooked. Data and census is great. Midtown, is anyone here that is from Midtown and has been Midtown and has been around Midtown for long enough, knows it's a community-driven community place. We just don't want that to be overlooked. And as the representative here for the Midtown Business Alliance, just ensuring that the local businesses, oftentimes from neglected voices or overlooked parts of the community, are heard and have a seat at the table. That's all we're here for. We have. Ms. Stryker has been great from day one. It's a lot. I mean, it's a 218-page report. I don't think there's ever been a more thorough statistical analysis of Midtown, which is tremendous. At the same time, Midtown is an often picked apart community. We're surveyed all the time. That's a part of a larger discussion. But we certainly applaud their effort. I mean, there's a ton of information in this set of in this data that is truly helpful for us and for the community at large.
I So, I mean, before we get, I do want to just quickly share. First of all, I'm really glad you're here. It's good to see you in the room. I think in your comments, you picked up on a tension that we experienced. I think you know that we've done dozens of community events. We did a survey with a national organization that does, really in-depth analysis of community experience. We worked with credible messengers. We put an open call to actually paid credible messengers embedded from within the community. And still, because, as you said, Midtown is a neighborhood that has been picked apart and often overlooked and surveyed out the wazoo, right? And because of that history, we walked into a community that was exceptionally skeptical of what we were coming to ask. And it's nobody's fault that this community was mistrusting or I shouldn't say this, the community is not a monolith. Many subgroups within Midtown were very skeptical and were not trusting of this process. And we're transparent about that. I think that's part of why, by the way, our first section in the recommendations were all about embedding civic engagement more thoroughly within city government, not just for a project, not just for the 18 months to 24 months that consultants come in and do a project, but active civic engagement that the city could be doing on a more regular basis. I think that trust building that you're talking about and unearthing the everyday, I think that's something that every government is really struggling to do right now. Democracy is a thing. It requires care and nurturing. And so that is why that first section is so critical in the recommendations. But I do want to acknowledge that we did get a very significant amount of community input, and we did work with key community members who do represent, and Shate can speak to this, groups within the community who have historically been underrepresented. But it's always a challenge when you come into a community that has that history. So I just want to address that.
And Bill, I'm wondering if you mind if I ask you a question. So does the business community have concerns with the way Midtown is represented in the report? Is there like a concern about that? And if so, I'd love to hear more about that. We're happy to look at the suggestions that you brought. And if you want to set up a meeting and talk about any of this, we're still happy to. By the end of the month would be ideal so that we can incorporate that input in our edits.
Short answer is yes. And finding common ground, which is getting in touch with the Latin and Spanish speaking community. we as the MBA have struggled with that. We've failed. We've tried and tried and tried. So finding common ground, if we can collectively do that, that's a huge part of the and growing part of this community. So yeah, certainly I'd love to.
Yeah, and also I do know that you've done, I don't know what the results of your study was for the business community. I know you did that survey within the businesses in Midtown. We would be happy to incorporate those results into our study. That's something that we've expressed to the Business Alliance, and we'll express it again here tonight. So we're always happy to incorporate your needs, the business needs. This is something that from the beginning that we've been really clear about. So I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you. And again, it's not just the businesses of Midtown. I'm here just as the Midtown Business Alliance, but it's also the residents, and you guys have certainly done a great job with that. Thank you.
Any last thoughts, questions? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sitting through this with us.